Well, there was a big shakeup in D.C., but I'm not talking about politics today.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast where we talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days, and on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram, but the best way to get a hold of us is right here on the YouTube page. And I swear to you, I read the comments, even the ones who say that I stink. Hey, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 of bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Now, I'm recording this on late Monday afternoon, early Monday evening here in California. Games have already started. The Tigers and the Rays are playing in what could be a playoff preview. So be prepared, Major League Baseball, because there could be Major League Baseball playoff baseball played in Tampa Bay this year, and you may want to do something about that before you know it. Right now, the Tigers are winning. If the Tigers win that, then the Rays will fall to third place. But it's really a log jam out there in the American League. And right now, the Red Sox could make it more of a log jam if they win. They're playing Colorado. And I believe Seattle is idle tonight. So the Red Sox could pick up a half game. And Toronto is going to be playing the White Sox. They're just starting up there. And that the Blue Jays have built up a 3-game lead in the American League East. So that's interesting. The Red Sox have climbed back into the playoff race in no small part for the part that they beat the Nationals over the weekend like a rented mule. And the news came out very late last night that the Nationals have decided to make a big move. And I'm assuming it was very late last night because I went to bed at a reasonable hour last night, and I woke up and I went to my job. And it wasn't until my lunchtime, actually, that I learned that the Nationals have fired the president of baseball operations, Mike Rizzo, and their manager, Dave Martinez. Mike DeBartolo is going to be the assistant GM, has been promoted to the interim general manager. And Miguel Cairo, who for a brief period in 2000, I think it was 2022, was it? That he filled in. Yeah, it was 2022 that he filled in for Tony La Russa after La Russa had a health issue, and as manager of the White Sox. And the White Sox actually played quite well under Miguel Cairo. Thank you very much. I think if you're going to have an interim manager, someone like Miguel Cairo is a fine choice. As I said, he has a little bit of a managerial experience in his time with the Chicago White Sox. He is a respected person in baseball. He's a baseball lifer. He's one of those people who was never a huge star, but was always a quality player, always was around winning teams, and you got the sense that he's probably forgotten more baseball than most of us have already known. I do want to break down my thoughts on one of the two people who let go, but let's just first take a look at the reality of this situation. The Nats are not having a good year. The Nats are not having a good year at all. They obviously just got clobbered by the Red Sox. They are in dead last place in the National League East. And I think a lot of people thought they may have been starting to turn a corner because they do have some young talent on the team. I think the fact that I think some people thought they would be not in the cellar, mainly because they're in the same division as the Marlins. Keep in mind right now, the Marlins are in third place. And they are, they're not quite a contender yet. They're 8 games under 500, but they've been aided by the fact that the Braves are very much beaten up and injured, and the Marlins did go on that big long winning streak. The Nationals have taken a record of 37-53 after the sweep by the Boston Red Sox, and this is a team that They were never above 500. That just wasn't going to happen. But they went on a nice streak in mid-May to the end of May, where they won 10 out of 14 games, and they looked like, okay, they climbed to within 2 games under 500 going into June. And if they had a good June, then they could have found themselves back in the hunt. I mean, there were still a bunch of teams in front of them, but again, 2 games under 500, and it's knocking on the door, 8 games out, but a lot of time to go for that third wild card spot. And if they had a good June and July, they might be into something. Well, since then, no team in baseball has been worse. They are 9-23 since then. The worst record in baseball, worse than Colorado, worse than the White Sox, worse than the Braves. Any team that you think has been bad in the stretch. By the way, Cleveland in that same stretch has gone 9-22. I didn't realize their record had been that bad, and that's going to be a whole different podcast to talk about one of these days. But they absolutely collapsed, and they had a kind of a deadline to wonder, are they going to exercise their 2026 options for Rizzo and Martinez? That was going to be coming in July. And if they weren't going to exercise, if they kind of made the decision that they weren't going to exercise the option, well, then in a way it makes sense. It makes sense to be able to say, hey, look, if we're not going to bring you back, then what's the point of having you being a lame duck general manager and a lame duck manager? And it's the organization's right to try to make a decision like that. And you take a look at the fact that Rizzo has been involved in the organization pretty much since they arrived from Montreal before the 2005 season. He's been there for almost that entire time, and he's been the GM for well over a decade. And they had a revolving door of managers. Remember, they made the playoffs in think about this. They made the playoffs in 2012, 2014, and 2016. Those 3 years, 2012, 2014, 2016. 3 seasons out of 5, they were in the playoffs. And each one of those years, they had a different manager. Davey Johnson was the manager in 2012. Matt Williams was the manager in 2014. And Dusty Baker was the manager in 2016. They made the playoffs again in 2017. And then he was gone. Dave Martinez came in, and they won the World Series with Dave Martinez. So they went to the playoffs with 4 different managers in one decade. But Martinez has been there since 2018. And while they won the World Series, but they haven't even sniffed at being a legit contender since then. So I'm sure they thought this is time to make a change, and that is their right to do so. And sometimes making a change to the manager is basically a way of saying, hey, this is just our way of saying it's time to make a change. And sometimes it's their way of saying, all right, we don't accept this. And I'm not going to begrudge them getting rid of Dave Martinez. However, I am going to defend and question the letting go of Mike Rizzo, because I think he deserves a lot of credit for a lot of the very good things that happened in Washington under his watch. All right, let's hear from our good friends over at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball like me, or you're about golf, or on high-stakes soccer action, or tennis, or whatever, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Now, I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite pitching matchups, and I seem to always leaning on pitchers from the Pirates for some reason. Heaney one day, Skeens the next, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use and fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like a playoff game. Now, whether I'm doing game parlay or I'm watching a bet ride into the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm in on the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, let's have fun this summer. All right. Whether or not Dave Martinez wants to get, deserve to get fired, or whether Mike Rizzo deserved to get fired is neither here nor there. And maybe, just maybe, there's a mutual situation here. Maybe Rizzo doesn't want to be part of a rebuilding process. Maybe it's time to move on. Sometimes a change does someone good. He's been there for decades. He was almost at 20 years in the organization. I can't imagine he'd want to go because he was there were some signs, this recent horrible streak notwithstanding, that there's going to be some hope in Washington. And I'm sure he would like to be there when when it comes to harvest. Now, I have to give Rizzo a lot of credit, and the ownership of the Washington Nationals as well. But Rizzo made a lot of decisions, some of which were very unpopular as they happened. But he kept a franchise that was one of the worst teams in baseball and had the reputation of being, one of two franchises to never see the World Series. And he gave fans in Washington an unbelievably exciting decade with a phenomenal conclusion. And if you are a franchise looking for, if you're a fan base looking to the heavens for something positive to happen to your baseball team, then look at what Rizzo did as general manager of the Washington Nationals in the 2010s. Really take a look at it. This was a team, when they were the Montreal Expos, they had one trip to the playoffs in the strike season of 1981. They would have made the playoffs in the strike season of 1994. They just missed in 79 and 80. And they had contenders for wildcard teams when they were owned by Major League Baseball. This is a franchise that I loved and had so many great players, but was snake bit. Absolutely snake bit. If it wasn't for the strike, they probably would have won the pennant in 1994 and probably would have had so much excitement they would have built Labatt Stadium and we would still have the Montreal Expos. But they didn't happen. And so off they came to Washington, which was really the only place for them to play because RFK Stadium was sitting there unused. And after just prolonged negotiations with the Orioles to have another team enter that market, they entered Washington, a baseball market so terrible that they actually made a Broadway musical about the Washington Senators their ineptitude in trying to win a pennant. It was called Damn Yankees. People have been calling them Damn Yankees long before free agency. And it involved a deal with the devil. It involved a deal with the devil. I mean, just say that again. And people said, yeah, that probably makes sense. That's the best way that Washington could see a World Series. They saw a World Series title in 1924. They played one of the weirdest World Series in the history of baseball in 1925, which they lost to Pittsburgh. And then they lost the 1933 World Series to Carl Hubble and the New York Giants. That was the year King Kong came out, the first one, 1933. That was during FDR's first year as president. It's a long time ago. And they didn't get to the World Series until 2019. Washington didn't see a World Series until 2019. That's right. They hadn't gone to a World Series. Washington fans had not seen a World Series since before the musical Damn Yankees came out. And it took 3 teams to do it because that Washington Senators team, which sometimes they call themselves the Nationals, moved and became the Washington Senators. But that same year, they expanded into Washington. It was a weird sort of, wait, did the Senators move or not? And they created a new Senators team. Are you following this? And they failed, and they wound up moving to become the Texas Rangers. And so it wasn't until Montreal collapsed and the MLB ownership of it collapsed that this city of Washington this completely baseball graveyard of a market, got a team. And it took a bit. It took a couple really bad seasons that got him Bryce Harper and Steven Strasburg. And it took a while to get the Rubik's Cube turned right. But it was, and you got to give the ownership of the Nationals credit because they did make some bold moves, including bringing in Max Scherzer, which is one of the single best free agent signings in the history of baseball. And they were able to develop Anthony Rendon and Zimmerman and some of other fine players, along with Strasburg and Harper, and eventually Juan Soto. And they got to the playoffs in 2012. And Mike Rizzo made the decision, with Strasburg coming off of Tommy John surgery, that he was going to limit his innings. And they shut Strasburg down before the playoffs. So the first time Washington was going to see a postseason series since 1933, and they're going to shut down one of their best pitchers. And their lack of pitching depth is ultimately what killed them, and their gassed bullpen in that series where they were one strike away from winning against St. Louis. And way back then in 2012, I was doing the Old Sully Baseball podcast, and I said the only way Mike Rizzo could be redeemed for making this decision would be two things had to happen. The Nationals would have to win the World Series, and Steven Strasburg would have to play a big part of it. And that's exactly what happened. Now, it took a while, and there were heartbreaking losses in the series loss, in against the Cardinals in 2012, against San Francisco, including an 18-inning game where they lost at home, where for every inning of the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th inning, every time the pitcher threw the ball, the Nationals could have won the game. And then they lost in Game 5 in best-of-5 series in both 2016 and in 2017. In 2016, when they had the tying run at the plate against Los Angeles. And each time they found a new way to lose. And they got off to a rancid start. And Bryce Harper left, and Rizzo looked like an idiot. And they got off to a rancid start in 2019, and he pushed the right buttons, made the right moves, and Howie Kendrick, of all people, and Juan Soto, and Max Scherzer, and yes, friend of the podcast, Sean Doolittle, and Steven Strasburg, World Series MVP. But think about that for a second. They won the World Series in the final year of the run. They got the great climax after all that heartbreak. And how many times did they make the right moves, pushing the right buttons? Scherzer wasn't there at the beginning. Trey Turner wasn't there at the beginning. Bryce Harper wasn't there at the end. They were able to make the right moves, push the right buttons, and ultimately have a decade of excitement for Washington baseball fans. 12, 14, 16, 17. They had 5 trips to the playoffs in a decade. 5. For any franchise, that's a good decade. 5 trips to the playoffs, including a World Series title. You show me a franchise, including the Yankees, who wouldn't take that. And before you poo-poo me, Yankee fans, you missed the playoffs a couple of times in the 2010s, right? You didn't win a World Series in the 2010s, right? Wouldn't you rather have a World Series title and 4 other trips to the playoffs than whatever happened in the 2010s? There's not a franchise in baseball that would not have taken the decade that they had, even with the heartbreak, because the heartbreak eventually made it so the winning was even better. Now, it dried up. Things dry up. It happens. But do you know what happened? Mike Rizzo showed that the leadership that he gave, putting the team together, making some risky moves, and making sure they weren't playing for 1 year, but for a whole decade, eventually he punted. And when he punted, and of course it's led to some of the down times they're having right now, don't kid yourself. Mike Rizzo, even though the losing started, he was doing a good job. And do you know what? I can prove it. All right, let's hear from our good friends over at OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a burst pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, what did you do? Did you wait? No, you called the next one. That's why having a reliable business line is so important. That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communications from an app to your phone or your computer. And if you're like juggling multiple phones just to keep your business and personal calls separate, OpenPhone can solve that instantly. And the AI agent handles after-hour calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you don't have to miss any customers ever again. And the whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. No more, who's handling this? So listen, OpenPhone is offering Locked On MLB listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnMLB. That's OpenPhone.com/LockedOnMLB. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls and no missed customers. That's OpenPhone. Now, a lot of times when a team is starting to fall apart, the thought process is, well, you want to trade your veterans and get some young players. And a lot of times that doesn't work out. Take a look at the litany of anonymous people who were acquired for players like Cliff Lee, Roy Halladay, CC Sabathia, David Price, all these players that when they were being traded, it's like, oh my God, there's an ace pitcher available. Well, yeah, we're trading an ace pitcher, but we're going to get some quality players back. And you know, look at the big pile of nothing that the Orioles got from Manny Machado. That's usually how it works. Usually the players, yes, there have been times where you get a Josh Donaldson in a trade like that. Yes, there are times you'll get Ryan Sandberg or John Smoltz or Jeff Bagwell in a trade like that, or Brady Anderson or Kurt Schilling or whomever. It's usually not. It's usually Matt Laporta. Usually Kyle Drabeck. It's usually someone who doesn't amount to piddly poo. So when the Nationals saw that things were starting to fall apart, Mike Rizzo started trading away some of their pieces. Well, one thing he also did is he let Anthony Rendon go, and he didn't sign him to a long-term deal. And we're all happy that Anthony Rendon got paid because he did a fine job in helping the Washington Nationals win the World Series, and he is now essentially just collecting money from the Angels, and the Nationals don't have to worry about that anymore. But Rizzo did a good job trading away some of the veterans. He traded away Max Scherzer and Trey Turner in a deal to Los Angeles. I bet you forgot Max Scherzer played for the Dodgers for an hour and a half. He wound up getting the save against the Giants in that weird series. Well, they got Keibert Ruiz and Josiah Gray for that deal. Now, Gray is on the injured list right now, but he made the All-Star team in 2023. When he comes back, he's a talented pitcher. And Keibert Ruiz is an everyday player. They got an everyday catcher and someone who made the All-Star team who's going to come back and hopefully be another good quality pitcher for them. They read the tea leaves and they realized they couldn't sign Juan Soto to a big deal. Well, they traded him to a deal to San Diego. They got James Wood. James Wood is an all-star, a legitimate all-star. They got C.J. Abrams. He made the all-star team. And Mackenzie Gore, who's a terrific young pitcher who will also probably eventually be an all-star. Think about those players that they got. Now, whether or not you hold much credence to making the all-star team, if you made the all-star team, you know you're at least a quality major league player. Even some of the ones you go like, why did they make the team this year? It's not because they should be DFA'd. Right there, they're assuming Mackenzie Gore eventually makes an all-star team, and I think that's a no-brainer. He got 4 all-stars and Keibert Ruiz, who's an everyday player, in those deals. In other words, he did that thing that most GMs can't pull off. and that is get actual building blocks for an upcoming team. And I'm sure Mike Rizzo would love to be there to see the harvest, to see the team that he put together and planted, to see when that happens. But maybe it's time to turn the page. Well, I'll tell you one thing. If you are a team who is unhappy with their current general manager situation, if you are a team that says, wow, we're being put, the roster construction is really rotten on this club, then give Rizzo a call because he can do it. And I'm telling you, whenever I hear people say, try to defend someone, let's just take a random name, Brian Cashman. And there are people like me who say, he's been there forever. And there are things that aren't working. And every year we have to hear that the problem with the Yankees is their roster construction. The Cashman defenders always say, well, you can't just fire Cashman. You gotta hire someone else. Who are you going to hire? I've been saying, why not Kim Ng? Well, now why not Rizzo? There's two names. Rizzo is going to be picked up by another team, and they'll probably do a fine job. As for Dave Martinez, who knows? Who knows? I wish him best. The guy is one of two managers in the history of baseball to win a World Series title in Washington. He'll probably find a home. He'll probably find a place to land. No doubt about that, I think. But Rizzo is out there. You don't like your GM? You don't like your team? You don't like how your team is put together? Call him. Call him. He'll make gutsy moves. He'll spend money correctly. There's one thing to have a general manager have money to spend from ownership. He signed players who made a difference, including the Max Scherzer signing, which will go down in history as one of the greatest free agent signings in the history of baseball. And made a tough call with Steven Strasburg that turned out to work. Yes, I know he signed a big, long contract that didn't work out in the end. Fine. That's another bag of tomatoes. And if you're a Washington fan, how can you be mad at the person who won the World Series MVP against Houston? Rizzo is going to get a job. He may get a job before I'm finished recording this podcast, and he deserves it. He did a terrific job with Washington, and I'm convinced he was still doing a terrific job. If it's time to move on, sometimes it's time to move on. It's time for fresh blood. Sometimes it's fresh blood. And I'm not going to tell the Nationals how to do their business. If it was a situation where they decided not to pick up the option, well, then, going a separate way might be the right thing to do. I don't know, and neither do you. But Rizzo's going to get a job, and he'll probably put together another winner. So I'm going to watch some baseball tonight. I recommend you do the same thing. So follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days, on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And get a hold of me right here by putting down the messages right here in the YouTube box. And hey, I just want to thank you so much for making Locked On MLB your first listen every day. For your second listen, stay right here and check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night right here on the Locked On MLB feed on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Talking about Rizzo, about Dave Martinez, and about what it means to have a successful decade when you're a team that's, had a bad existence. This has been Locked On MLB. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.